What's going on, everybody? Welcome to episode 34 of Stir Crazy, where we give you the takes of the news that you absolutely will not get from the mainstream. Because basically, we don't care about both sides. We care about what is just. That's brought to you by the Real News Network. I'm your host, Kim Brown. Coming up on today's show, folks, police brutality still very much doing its thing, pandemic or no pandemic. Why and the reasons and some of the anecdotal incidents that have been happening across this country have been enough to continuously shock us, but unfortunately it has not shocked us into complete reform. And the lack of humanity that is being shown to many marginalized people and communities around the nation and within our prison system is something that is definitely worthy of discussion today. So listen, we want you to join in the conversation as usual in the chat, in the comments. Y'all always get it on. From what I understand, there was people already in the chat waiting for us for the show to begin today. So we do appreciate that as always. But as we promised this week, you have the opportunity to join us live. Like, you can actually put your face in the place. So be looking out for the Zoom link in the chat/comments. Our social media guy, James, is going to drop that in there for y'all. So you can just click on the link and it'll bring you directly to the waiting room. Where you can get on and ask us a question, give us a critique, say what's up, say hello. Always be nice, and we'll have a good dialogue going. So right now it's time for us to bring in our fantastic panel, an esteemed panel today to discuss all of these issues around incarceration and, of course, police brutality. Today we're joined with Neill Franklin. Neill is the executive director for the Law Enforcement Action Partnership. We're also joined today with Stephen Janis. He's an investigative reporter, host of the Police Accountability Report, which airs here on The Real News. And our own Eddie Conway. He hosts the show Rattling The Bars. He's joining us today from Baltimore. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here on Stir Crazy.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Kim.
Thanks, Kim.
Yes, thanks.
So the first place we're going to start is the topic of this ProPublica piece, which shows that early data indicates that Black and brown people and Black and brown communities are being over-policed with directives of social distancing, in stark contrast to the armed protests, reopen the country, reopen the economy protests that have been happening at state capitals nationwide. I want us to go to Raleigh, North Carolina, if we could, Dwayne. I want to run that video from Raleigh. This is from the News Observer. They have been rallying 5 consecutive Saturdays in Raleigh to reopen North Carolina. Let's take a look at this, guys.
Who's not wearing a mask. I want to thank you.
The governed, not the governor, hold the power.
We are the leaders. They are the servants. They are the representatives.
Look at that. That's not us. That's not us, bro.
If they just go back to following the damn Constitution, we'd be all right.
Yeah. It's in my flag. That's why I'm carrying it. Around the window, billow it out. That way they'll get some good pictures.
Perfect.
Hey, Larry.
Guys, I'm sure there are some observations that you all have. Let me again credit the News Observer for that video. Photojournalist Julia Wall shot that footage over the weekend. Neill Franklin, did you see the police sitting in proximity of the protesters, but not doing anything towards the protesters? And we've seen this a lot, where these people have been flouting and defying stay-at-home orders with seemingly no legal consequences.
Well, and actually, yeah, I saw the police, and actually they were actually protecting them as they were walking down the street, the motorcade, making sure that they don't get run over by other cars or whatever. This is no different than any other issue that we deal with in the criminal justice system, where African Americans are disproportionately arrested, charged, convicted. So whether we're talking about not wearing masks, COVID-19, social distancing, or whether we're talking about the war on drugs, whether we're talking about any crime or any violation of the criminal justice codes around the country, Blacks are disproportionately affected in a negative way. So this is no different. And if people are expecting something different, I don't know why.
I guess less so expecting something different. And well, you're right about that, because we've seen many a white supremacist march/protest go completely unchecked by law enforcement. Eddie, this kind of reminds me of the White Citizens Council, like the Klan rallies of yore. People are making comparisons to the Tea Party. I'm like, no, this looks a little bit more vintage racist than that.
Well, in fact, there's no difference between the Tea Party, the White Citizen Council, the Klan, the National Socialist, White People's Party, or, to be quite honest, the Promise Keepers and the rest of the people that are walking around in suits and ties that are promoting this kind of thing. This is about business. This is about opening America, because the people at the top are not getting the profits that they would get if people were working in the shops and the factories and so on, paying rents and mortgages and so on. This is about the economy, but it's not about the economy down on the ground, Main Street. It's about the economy, Wall Street. And the people that's making millions and billions really don't care how many people die, because they're not gonna be infected. They're not gonna come in contact with other people. They're surrounded by servants and so on. So they just want the population to go back to work, and they don't care who dies. And unfortunately, the hospital systems and the rest of the systems has a priority, and it's dictated by white supremacy. And so the people that don't get treatments or respirators or ventilators and so on are going to be people of color, or people that are extremely poor.
Stephen, why does this look so much more striking during the pandemic? I mean, I guess it's a fool's errand to sort of expect a different outcome when we've seen this play out in different ways, but pretty much the same kind of outcome every single time. But it seems as though the fact that there is a virus out there that has killed over 80,000 people in the span of 4 months is of no consequence to law enforcement to try to enforce some sort of public health directives.
Well, that's something that we've covered extensively at the Police Accountability Report. And one of the things that this pandemic has done is declawed the imperative of American policing in a way that I don't think we're used to seeing, at least en masse. And in this case, you can see that we have this sort of concept in the Police Accountability Report called hegemonic policing, where we kind of separate policing into two categories. One would be investigative or solving crimes, and one would be sort of executing a political agenda, like Eddie was talking about, to like enforce poverty and enforce income inequality. And so what we're seeing here is how the hegemonic facet of policing, which is really geared towards picking winners and losers, making sure that poor people or African Americans cannot have access to the justice system, lose their communal efficacy. We see it writ large. And I think that's what's so stark about it, is that it becomes, in a sense, an opportunity really to witness what this country is all about. Unfortunately, it's a traumatic moment, and it's a horrible moment. But what you're seeing is what policing is in most communities of color, and especially communities like Baltimore. I mean, we've seen successive Justice Department reports in Baltimore in particular that showed that Baltimore police used racist and unconstitutional policing, and nothing has really changed. And the reason it hasn't changed is because of what Eddie's talking about, which is a connection between income inequality, poverty, and policing, which is really a political instrument of keeping poverty and keeping people who are poor out of the political system.
Mm. Well, in addition to incidences of police brutality that we've seen happen since the pandemic has exploded across America, I'm thinking specifically right now of Breonna Taylor, the 26-year-old young lady from Louisville, Kentucky, where police allegedly broke into her apartment trying to serve a warrant for a person who was already in custody, which was amazing. And amazingly tragic in a variety of ways. But the police were in plain clothes. They did not announce themselves, at least according to Breonna's family, and they shot and killed her 8 times. And her boyfriend stands charged now with attempted murder of police, even though it's from all accounts, it seemed as though he was acting in self-defense, as he was a legal gun owner. So there's a lot going on with that. But we've also seen this vigilante sort of racist actions coming out against Black people, against Ahmaud Arbery specifically. And his mother has decided to speak out about what happened to her son. Let's hear from her.
Ahmaud was the most humblest individual that you could ever meet. Ahmaud cared. Ahmaud was kind. Ahmaud was well-mannered. Ahmaud was, like I basically say all the time, to know Ahmaud is to love Ahmaud. And I really wish people could have really got to know Ahmaud, to really, really love Ahmaud, because Ahmaud was love. I just wanted him to be successful. I mean, he was 25, and Ahmaud had a chance to do anything that he chose to do. And I used to always tell, all my kids, as long as you're above ground, you have the opportunity to do whatever you want to do. So we just got to keep pushing, and that's what we were striving to do.
Neill, Franklin, in advance of the father and son duo who have been charged with Ahmaud Arbery's murder, there was a lot of propaganda floating around the right-wing, Twitter sphere, social media sphere, which shows the video, the closed-circuit television video of Ahmaud going to a construction site and walking inside. Some people have alleged that he stole something. I saw the video. That's not what I saw. But what I did see was somebody who done something that I think many people do if there is a new construction project, right? A new construction project around, you want to go in, see what they're doing, see how far along they are, what's the progress, how much is all this, are they going to sell all this for when it's all done? So the fact that one of the gentlemen was a former police, and it is being reported by the Washington Post that this ex-detective lost his rights to make arrests because he skipped out on a use of force training program. What does that say about the fact that this person still felt entitled and empowered enough to chase Ahmaud down, pull a gun on him, and eventually shoot to kill him, and feel as if they did not commit any sort of crime?
Yeah, I think a lot of that, the mentality that he had, is very common in policing, because we, the public, don't have the ability to check the police. The police still investigate themselves, and we know that that's a problem. Whenever it comes to the use of force, whenever it comes to corruption cases, the police don't need to be the investigating arm. We need a third party to conduct those investigations and to hold them accountable. The public, the community, neighborhoods need to be a part of that process also. And over time, the police become very comfortable in the positions, in the power that we've given them, the unchecked power, if I might say, not holding them accountable. We need to find a way to change that. This is a culture that needs to be changed, and it can only be changed by us, the people, doing what we need to do to put different people in power, and our elected officials and so on, who can help us change this paradigm that we have in policing. But you touched on something about this individual, the fact, the problems that he had, missing training, not being certified for years, but yet he was unable to go about the business of policing under the prosecutor's office. This isn't an isolated incident. We have problems like this all across the country, but we're not able to hold people accountable. And we need to find a way to do that.
Stephen Janis, the fact that this guy was still allowed to go around and I guess act as an agent of the prosecutor's office in a way, and that 2 prosecutors had to recuse themselves, and the one said that he supported him, said that he felt he was within his rights to make a citizen's arrest in the case of Ahmaud Arbery.
I mean, actually, you know, if you look at there were 4 prosecutors who actually, one way or another, recused themselves from this particular case. And I think it shows the power of law enforcement that transcends just the badge and the law, but also kind of works its way into the very, you know, absolute, you know, the police have this sense that even if they're not wearing a badge, even if they're not properly trained, we have this sort of idea of, you know, the culture of police, that we can use violence whenever we want to adjudicate something on the street. And it's stunning because one of those prosecutors I was reading, which is very interesting, had prosecuted an African-American woman for helping another woman at a voting machine twice over something that was absolutely nothing. And yet all 4 of them, all 4 other prosecutors recused themselves. And I think one thing that's worth mentioning is that they were using this cover of the grand jury, that they were going to bring this case to a grand jury, which is really just a cover for police-involved killings. The whole system is really geared against non-accountability, as Neill talks about. There is no independent agency in law enforcement. All law enforcement is interconnected, and they do this over and over again. We've seen it in cases here in Maryland, like the case of Anton Black, who was basically killed by positional asphyxiation, and we saw it with Freddie Gray. You know, there's just it's just impossible to hold police officers accountable. And Neill is correct. Until we have a system that works, these things will keep happening.
Mm. Well, in terms of police accountability, like I said, we've seen I can't even call it a rise in this vigilantism, because that has pretty much been a constant, you know, pretty much throughout this experiment called America. But there was an incident recently that I felt was scary, and thankfully no one was harmed physically, but it was still a frightening scenario for a mother and her teenage son. This happened in North Carolina, where an armed mob appeared at their doorstep demanding for the young man, whom they had mistaken identity in the first place, to come on outside. Wrong house. We got the report from WECT TV News Channel 8 out of Wilmington, North Carolina. Let's listen to it.
Hey, man, have you about a 17, 18-year-old daughter here tonight by any chance? No.
They said they were looking for a missing girl. The commotion got the attention of the entire neighborhood Sunday night. People coming out on their porches, capturing on Ring doorbell cameras. Several cars lined up in front of Monica Shepard's home, where she lives with her 18-year-old son.
I'm still in shock. I'm literally like, I don't sleep well. I'm still in shock.
Damien is graduating from Laney High School this year without the usual fanfare because of COVID-19.
I don't think in my 40 years of living here in New Hanover County I've ever seen anything like this. We are so lucky that nobody got shot or killed.
Damien says he was playing video games Sunday night when he heard a loud knock on the door and opened it.
I see these guys in front of me, and they're holding guns, and it looks like there's one in a police uniform. And he's the one that speaks to me first. He says, we're looking for a missing girl. We were given this address, and we were given your name, and we were told that she's here, so we're gonna enter in.
The noise woke his mom, who jumped into action, pushing her son out of the door to the other side of the room, fearing he'd be hurt.
Coming to the door like that with a mob of people with guns, what do we expect? What were the intentions? Like, what if he was the person that they were looking for? Or what if I was not at home? What would have happened? I don't want to have that conversation. I don't want him to be a statistic.
Damien says he told the group they had the wrong guy and the girl wasn't there. His mom says her son repeated his own name, chanting it over and over until it clicked for the group that he wasn't the person they were looking for.
But the whole time, of course, I noticed the weapon on the law enforcement's hip, and I didn't know what was going to happen.
The Shepards now want answers for why no one is facing charges, and they want to see the members of the group held responsible.
Well, Eddie, as of now, there have not been any stated arrests in connection to this incident. The person who was a member of law enforcement has been relieved of their duties in connection to this. So I guess that's a silver lining. But at the same time, I mean, in 2020, a gang of armed white men coming to the home of a black family, demanding that the black young man come out. I mean, it smacks of historical overtones of the lynch mob, but also, I mean, how many of our brothers and sisters are in jail right now, and the police came knocking at their door the exact same way, and they are incarcerated behind something that they also didn't do. So what is your take on what happened to this young man in North Carolina in this year 2020?
Well, I guess my take is that the military industrial complex polices and controls the world that's primarily people of color, with 800 military bases, more bases than the next leading 10 countries of the world. The criminal justice system and the prison industrial complex is the domestic arm of that control. It polices and controls the populations within the geographical borders of the United States. So what we're seeing is what happens to people all over the world all the time, whether they're in Yemen, whether they're in Syria, whether they're in Iran, Iraq, whether they're in Venezuela or wherever. The same thing happens in our communities, and we need to make that connection. It's the only way you can control a large amount of people and exploit them is to be able to have military force. In the case of the United States, the military force here is the police force. And that's been for 200 years.
Yeah.
We got a comment from the comments. Oh, I'm sorry, Stephen. Let me just read this comment real quick.
Go ahead.
I know you got to tag in right on this because she's talking about the unions. Black Magic says, as much as I support unions, the police union is the strongest in this nation. Until pensions and benefits are taken, this will continue. What were you going to say, Stephen Janis?
That's a really good point. We did a show on that, but I was going to say, Tay and I had covered the story in Pocomoke City, the firing of its first Black police chief, and we started in 2015. And, the basic conflict was an African-American police chief that was policing, using community policing. And there was a drug unit in Worcester County that got pissed off. And so they found a reason to fire him. I won't go into that story, but we noticed over time after Trump was elected that there was a lot more hostility. I mean, there was a lot of racial tension, but as Trump sort of gave people this idea, that the racist thoughts you've been having, gave them the sense that it's not only safe, but that you were right. We saw sort of a much more hostile environment as we went down to Pocomoke in terms of people who maybe wouldn't have said something, who were openly hostile to us, reporting about an issue that was very important to the town. So I think this is somewhat a function of that. It might be controversial, but I think that he has, in a sense, given the green light to this sort of behavior, and perhaps, might get worse.
So, your commenter was right. The unions have way too much power, whether we're talking at the local level or the national level, with the money that they donate to political, our elected officials, to the contracts that they've been able to get, like the one in Baltimore City. But I want to say something about this individual, this deputy, who I believe, from what I've heard, he's been terminated, not just relieved of duty. So he's actually been terminated. So that's a good thing. Not waiting for some criminal investigation, just looking at the facts as they are and saying that this person doesn't need to be wearing the uniform. So I hope that the sheriff does not allow him to come back. But the comfort level that this deputy had is common, what we're seeing throughout policing. So he's not in his own jurisdiction. He's wearing his uniform in another jurisdiction where he has no authority whatsoever, with the rest of his mob, going up to this home and terrorizing this family. So he had a certain level of comfort. And I'll say that this is probably not the first time that this deputy has done something like that, whether it's the use of force, whether it's just some sort of inappropriate behavior. So I wonder what the history is. I guarantee you, if you look into the personnel file or number of complaints that this particular deputy has, I guarantee you they're there. But it's gotten to a point where he's got a certain level of comfort where he thinks he can go to another jurisdiction, another county, and exhibit this type of behavior, which he knew was unlawful in every sense of the word. So again, until we, the people, figure out how we reel in some of this authority that we've given to the policing community, we're going to continue to have this pop up across the country. Whether it's this display of and I call it corruption, whether it's this display of it or excessive force, the use of deadly force unchecked, we're going to continue to have it. We've got to figure out a way for the communities to take control of their police departments.
But hey, Neill, there's no way you can defeat the police unions. We've seen it here. There are people who committed crimes in Baltimore City, have been convicted and are still working on the police department and have not been fired, convicted of misdemeanor crimes and falsifying evidence and all sorts of stuff. And they're still working in the police department. How on earth will we ever be able to break the power of the police unions? I don't see it happening.
Yeah, I tell you, as a, if I had ever stepped into that world of being a police chief, and despite the contract, when it comes to people violating policy, violating the law, as far as I'm concerned, I would have terminated them. I'll let them sue. The police unions, the police officers, they can sue. I'd much rather have a police officer sue for wrongful termination if they believe it was wrongful termination, which I wouldn't. I would rather have them sue than a citizen sue for excessive force or unfortunately, the loss of someone's life, and then you have the family sue. So let the police sue, and let's protect our citizens and our neighborhoods.
That's why you weren't police commissioner in Baltimore.
That's why I'll never be.
From the comments, gang, Supersonic Supersonic Cat. Can anyone police the police? That's a good question. Here's the question we should be asking. Can anyone police the oligarchs? Because they are the ones instructing the police. There is that. And there's no doubt that those who are in power, the very elite in our society, the super rich, have this protection. But I guess the racism, the whiteness, it sort of trickles down and it goes to those who are not necessarily of higher class and elitism. And this is a video that I wanted to take you guys to in Oklahoma City, because this did not involve police. But what happened was a black driver was in a neighborhood in the Oklahoma City area, and he was precluded from leaving the neighborhood by white residents who wanted to know why he was there and wanted to see his papers, basically. Let's take a look at this video, because I have a personal story I want to share afterwards.
That delivery driver, Travis Miller, tells me he recently had 2 deaths in his family, so it's been a hard couple of weeks, an emotional couple of weeks, and what he experienced while on the job here in this northeast Oklahoma City neighborhood didn't make things easier.
It was none of your business. I'm going out. That's where I'm going.
Home appliance and furniture delivery driver Travis Miller
got me blocked in, so I can't leave.
Trapped inside the Ashford Hills neighborhood Monday after finishing up a delivery.
My name's David Stewart.
I don't care what your name is. Get out the way.
About 30 minutes in, another homeowner joining Stewart.
Hey, all we want to know is why you're in here and who gave you the gate code. That's all we need to know.
Miller, not wanting to share his customers' personal information, waiting while the two claimed they were calling the police. About an hour later,
they must have contacted the customer, but the customer came around and they just spoke for a minute and he moved out the way.
An emotional Miller calling the police himself.
He said that he called the cops back and let them know that everything was clear, but I didn't want to leave and have it seem like I was trying to flee the scene or anything like that.
Miller talking to News 4 over the phone Wednesday.
I don't know what prompted him to, or what had been happening in that neighborhood for him to respond the way he did.
His Facebook clip quickly going viral, many, including Miller, feeling these actions were racially motivated. We tried calling Stewart.
Your call cannot be completed as dialed.
But the only number we could find for him was disconnected. We stopped by his house, too. No answer.
I just know that emotionally it was hard to maintain restraint, especially when you dealing with death in the family, 2 family members within 2 days of each other. I just did the best I could to make sure that I didn't make a bad situation worse.
So that video was from KFOR TV in Oklahoma City. And panel, you can hear the emotion in his voice because there was a lot going on there. And as I was watching that video, I felt my blood pressure go up because I've had that exact similar thing happen to me. And where it happened was so stunning at the time. It happened in the neighborhood that I grew up in North Laurel, in Howard County, Maryland. I was walking my dogs. I got into a little bit of a verbal dispute with another girl who was walking her dogs. Our dogs never interacted. They never fought, never bit. Long story short, I come back up to the parking lot walking my dogs, and this white woman has taken her car and blocked my car in the parking lot and refused to move. And when I finally managed to get out of the parking space, she followed me. She followed me for probably a good 2 miles. And the only reason she stopped following me is because I pulled into the Laurel police station, which is in a whole nother county from where I was living at the time. And I had to explain to these officers why I called them because there was some crazy woman following me. And she told me she had called the police. The following day, I went down to the Howard County Police Station and asked them, did they have a record of this incident? They did not, which kind of freaked me out even more. I'm like, why would she lie and say that she called the police as she's blocking me in? So I can relate to being asked in the 21st century by white people, show your papers. And, any of y'all are free to jump in here because law enforcement didn't get involved in this gentleman's incident out in Oklahoma City, but at the same time, I know his blood pressure was up. I know he was upset. And I know at the same time, he knew he had to keep it together because in case he did have to deal with the police, he had to make sure that it was clear to them that he was the victim here and not the aggressor.
I want to say something real quick. This is called false imprisonment, and so it is a crime, right? A lot of people don't know this, but you don't have to wait for the police to file charges on someone. You file a complaint, you're waiting for the police or the prosecutor's office to file criminal charges on someone who has violated the law. A lot of people don't know, for instance, in the state of Maryland, you can go right to the court commissioner's office and fill out an application for statement of charges, and which will be reviewed to see if there's enough probable cause there for a warrant or a summons for that person to come to court and to answer for what they did. So, and as a civilian, because I'm retired from policing now, I've actually used that process to have people charged who have done things to me. So that's another option. And I advise people to use it.
I'm stunned that people feel entitled enough that they can hold somebody and say, I'm going to hold you till the cops get here. Who the fuck do you think you are? You know what I mean? Now listen, in my incident, I had a bat in my trunk, and I swear to God, the only reason I didn't go upside her head or her car was because I knew how the story was going to play out. All of a sudden, angry black woman goes crazy for no reason. Innocent white person just was sitting there minding their business. I know what this script.
Right.
I see
and
this
Kim, you would end up behind bars, not that person. So one thing that these people understand is the loss of money, and until we start suing people, which is a form of holding people accountable, until we start putting their name out there, causing other issues. Well, we've seen some people lose jobs behind this type of behavior. We have to continue to do that, and we have to continue to put it out so people understand that there's a consequence for this type of behavior. And if we can do it in a collective manner, in an organized collective manner, it will have that much more of an impact.
Stephen Janis, talk to me about the onus of sort of documentation. Like, I feel like we're in an age where, if you don't capture it on camera, didn't happen. You know what I mean? It probably didn't go the way that you said it went. But I feel like there's such a responsibility placed on people who are victims of these type of incidents. Like, you have to prove it, right?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because, as someone who covered police brutality for almost 15 years, the dialogue changed completely when people had cameras to be able to document what police were doing. And we've discussed this phenomenon. I mean, this goes back to like the permit patty kind of story, where you have to document this kind of behavior. But what's really kind of disturbing about it is, and it's a concept we've talked about, there's like this policing pathos in our society, right? It's like the white people especially are imbued with this idea that they are policers of space, and they're used to seeing police spaced in certain communities. And so they adopt some of the tactics, like, this idea that this man could detain somebody is downright scary. And it's part of, I think, an expansive police propaganda mechanism tied again to what Eddie was talking about, which is income inequality, enforcing poverty and things like that. And, the best thing you can do is document it, because you can come to someone like me or a journalist, and perhaps get a perspective on the story. I mean, certainly the camera phone has been the biggest piece of technology in transforming the conversation about police brutality. And now, unfortunately, because certain types of people think they're empowered to police space in ways that is just unreal, that you are, in a sense, you should, in a sense, document. You should document everything, and make sure that your perspective, and make sure share it with the media. Call the police accountability report, because when we see this kind of stuff, it really is related and tied to the overall pathos of policing we have in this society.
Yes, and the dog co-signs as well. Eddie, what's your take on what happened to this gentleman? How white people, some racist white people, feel completely entitled to act as agents of law enforcement, to deputize themselves, in effect, to try to police people who are otherwise not paying them any attention.
Well, that's my dogs back there. I can't get back there to lock them away.
Okay.
But
that's okay. That's okay. We'll come back to you, Eddie. Okay. Well,
Kim, you can't underestimate how police infused our society is. How much we are accustomed to the imagery, to the rhetoric of policing. I mean, look at all the police shows that show the sort of honest cop just going up against the horde of criminals. It is infused in our psyches, and especially in white people's psyches, and they think they are entitled to policing the space of African Americans, of people, that it is so tied to our psyche, it's so tied to the American psyche, the rhetoric of the criminal justice system, that I think people behave this way because of it, and it shows how disturbingly ingrained policing is, the culture of policing is. And the reason we call it the pathos of policing is because it's kind of a disease. It spreads in the mind. It's a psychiatric disease, but in a sense, like, who gives these people the right? They don't have any right based on the law, on the Constitution. It's purely cultural production that creates these kind of situations and creates a pathos where people feel, okay, I can go and police this space, and I can tell this person what to do. And of course, the sense that it's been imbued in them that African Americans are somehow not deserving of the same rights that they are.
And God forbid that these people are armed. You know what I mean?
Right.
Trayvon Martin just reverberates over and over. Like if George Zimmerman had not been armed, chances are Trayvon would be alive right now.
Absolutely. But when you have a case like that with Trayvon Martin and Zimmerman, and you see the results of that case where Zimmerman goes free, at the end of the day, it's another failure within the system, which people see, people not being held accountable, 100% responsible for Trayvon Martin's death. In addition to what Stephen said, like with the shows and the media and all the things that are out there, they give people, again, the confidence, these white people, the confidence to challenge people, to hold people, as we saw in the video, we've seen people locked in apartment vestibules, not letting them out. Again, false imprisonment. Until we start holding folks accountable, and I'm glad you said, Stephen, you talked about documenting it. Even if you don't have a cell phone or camera available at the time, if you could at least make good notes immediately afterward, because they will become important if you decide to sue someone, that you've made copious notes immediately after the event. So you don't always need a camera. It's good to have one, But if you don't, there's still ways you can document the encounter, the incident, what happened. That could be very helpful to you if you end up in court behind it.
Let me just add something to that, because I still like to make the connection between capitalism, the ruling class, and white supremacy. And down from white supremacy comes this kind of behavior. And it's the behavior of people that think they have a special privilege to what I call the empire's wealth. Back during Occupy Wall Street, they were saying 99% against 1%, but actually it's more realistic to say 20% and 80%. And that 20% of people that think they have privilege that's benefiting from the capitalist system use force and recognize the need to keep everybody else under their station in place. And that's what you see. You see actors on the ground acting out the power of white supremacy under the cover of capitalism. And so they're in gated communities. They're in privileged positions. And anybody that comes near that property or near that wealth or not of their color is a threat to them. And in some cases, like these idiots out here that's saying open America back up with the flags and whatnot, they actually do a disservice to themselves because they're part of that 80% that's suffering and being exploited. But the way white supremacy worked, it tells them that they are better than the other poor people, divide and conquer. And so what you see in those gated communities are people that's already decided that they're better than all other humans on the planet. And that's the behavior you get.
Eddie, I want us to switch gears, if we could, to talk about people who are incarcerated right now during this pandemic. As predicted, COVID-19 has spread like wildfire behind bars in a lot of places, Rikers Island included, Cook County Jail included, in a lot of other hotspots. And unfortunately, there's been a lot of underreporting as it relates to the prison population and not enough focus on the plight of women who are incarcerated right now. And I know that you did an interview on Rattling the Bars in relation to that. We're going to play a clip from that, and then I want to get your take after that. Let's go, Dwayne.
Unfortunately, all we know is that we get reports every day that women are showing signs, they're showing symptoms, and we know that the state institutions are then sending our women into what they're calling an infirmary. We know that those infirmaries are not equipped with updated medical equipment or even updated medical staff. We know that that infirmary and then a whole institution in general does not have medical personnel who are equipped to deal with such a pandemic. And so when you ask me for numbers, all we can do is use what we call participatory research and just report that every day women are calling saying, my bump buddy just went to the infirmary. My bump buddy wasn't tested. I wasn't tested. We know that at this moment in the women's state prison, they're not even allowed to call out. So we can't even get updated information about who even went out. We know that the only time that a woman is tested where they can account for any number is once they have to leave the institution. So that's the only way that our women can even leave the institution is if they've already shown all 3 signs of COVID and that their symptoms have gotten so worse that the department is afraid to is afraid. And so they call 911. They're not even using the normal protocols, which a correctional officer would then, drive somebody to the hospital. They are refusing to even be close to our women at this moment. And so those numbers are false, because we know that no testing is happening in our institutions. So we don't have, the updated numbers that we would like. I mean, all we have is women calling us every day. I think we get about 5 calls a day. I know at least I alone from the local women's detention center, I get about 15 to 25 calls a day from the women saying, somebody in here is infected with COVID. They're not giving us the proper masks or gloves, and they're just, cramming us together and doing nothing. So that's all we have.
Yeah, yes.
Go ahead.
Okay, unfortunately, America has the largest prison population in the world. 25% of all the prisoners in the other 200 nations on the planet, 25% of those prisoners are here in the United States of America. 76% of them are people of color. The real problem with this is that women are the forgotten population, and it's also the fastest growing population of the prison systems. And nobody's paying attention to them. They're not being tested. None of the prisoners really are being tested. They're being transferred from one prison area to another prison area if they show signs of being sick. No one knows how they're getting infected. In some cases, it's been reported that guards are coming in without masks, without social distance, that they have already been tested as being positive. And so it's a real problem. And it reminds me of Nazi Germany. It reminds me of the concentration camps, because the hot spots, whether it's Rikers Island, whether it's New York State, whether it's Cook County, whether it's in Ohio, Lansing, these spots are incubators for this pandemic. And more people are located in the prison systems in every region that has it than anybody else. And nobody's paying that much attention to it. And that's a problem. And it almost reminds me of what happened in Germany, to be quite honest, for those first few years that Hitler was in charge, before somebody finally spoke up and said, people are dying behind those walls in those camps. That's what's happening here in America.
Well, clearly jail is too dangerous for the likes of Paul Manafort to remain behind bars because of coronavirus. And it's stunning that, not stunning really at all, but at the same time, they will acknowledge the danger for a person like him of tremendous privilege and wealth and connection. But at the same time, calls to decarcerate, to let out people who may be there on a probation violation or a small violation of sorts. The governors have taken minimal steps to let people out, to try to avoid what could be a death sentence behind bars because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Stephen Janis, we're seeing some legal, I can't say wranglings per se, but there was a case out in Illinois against the sheriff of Cook County, where the prison, Cook County Jail, they've had 7 inmates die. They have over 1,000 infections. And a federal judge ordered the sheriff to introduce better social distancing, better sanitation measures, and the sheriff is pushing back against it. It seems as though that these people who are behind bars right now are automatically being either condemned to die or condemned to a positive COVID-19 infection.
Yeah, the jail you mentioned, that Eddie mentioned, Marion County, Cleveland, had a 73% infection rate among its prisoners, and many prisons where they've actually done testing in the federal system have 50% infection rate. It is literally not an exaggeration to say that these are death sentences. We had a similar conflict here in Baltimore where our state's attorney, Marilyn Mosby, has called for release, of people, nonviolent offenders, and the governor has pushed back, calling for a criteria of like people over 60 or who have 90 days left. It has been an absurd because the state's attorney has said, look, we're sitting on a crisis here. We are going to have people dying, and people have died. There's been deaths in the Maryland system. There have been deaths in the DC system. And yet there's been pushback. It's been controversial. And even though it seems like a humane policy and also a policy of injustice, I mean, we had interviewed someone on our show who'd been waiting was going to be in jail until October 2021 to have his trial. Meanwhile, he's sitting in a prison where 15 of his cell block mates are infected, and he's in his 50s. It's just it's bizarre. I mean, this country is going to have to come to grips with what Eddie was talking about, our addiction to mass incarceration, and now it's going to be mass death. So I don't understand why the sheriff is pushing back, and similarly here with Governor Hogan, why he's pushing back. These policies remain, and it's actually better for the health of the community because, as Eddie said, it is an incubator, and it only creates a basically petri dish to sustain the virus. So it's not even in the best interest of the politicians who are fighting against it.
Neill, as Stephen and Eddie mentioned, that a lot of times the COs have this virus possibly and are spreading it both inside of jail and then when they go back home to their families and to their communities. And I think it was the union that represents DC correctional officers joined the lawsuit with, I think, the ACLU to mandate that they were better sanitary protections, better social distancing behind bars. But there seems to be a very obvious disregard for the lives of the correctional officers as well, as they are being made to show up to work under these conditions.
So we knew this was going to happen at the beginning of March. The very thing that we're trying to discourage our communities to do, which is gather in large groups, right? Because once you have one person introduce the virus to a large group of people, we know it's going to spread really quick. Our penal institutions are not self-contained. They're not isolated from community. We have people coming and going every day. And so all it takes is for one correctional officer, for one contract worker, for one medical profession to take it into the institution. And that's what we're seeing now. And we were advocating before this ever happened, let's start returning people home, getting them out of here, because as Stephen said, we have this petri dish and it's just sitting there waiting for one person to introduce the virus. And that's what we're seeing happen in Maryland and all across this country. And it's still not too late to get people out of these institutions. The more people we can get out of these institutions and back home in a safer environment, the better. So the better, not just for those people confined, but the better for our communities and our neighborhoods, because our correctional officers are going to continue to go to work. They have to go to work. Someone's got to be there. They don't stay there 24/7, and they're going to go home. So as the virus continues to grow within our penal institutions, our correctional officers, the nurses that do work there, the contractors that work there, they're going to take it outside of the institutions, back to their family members, back to others that they live with, and it's going to grow and blossom within our communities. So, it's still not too late, and we're going to continue to advocate for this to happen, and we'll see where we end up.
All right. Well, listen, gang, we are towards the end of the hour. And of course, here at The Real News, we try to bring you informative and in-depth programming. Of course, Police Accountability Report, fan favorite here on this show. And tonight will be the debut of the newest episode of Police Accountability Report, where the NAACP Legal Defense Fund sues the Policing Commission. Let's take a look at that preview.
So, one of the key players in the efforts to reform police has been the federal government. or at least it was. In our city, a Department of Justice investigation determined the Baltimore Police Department practiced racist and unconstitutional policing. The report led to calls for reform and a consent decree between the city and the DOJ. The results have been mixed at best. Remember, at the same time the DOJ was in Baltimore investigating the department, the notorious Gun Trace Task Force was robbing residents, dealing drugs, and stealing overtime. Still, even if the process is not always effective, it is a critical tool for holding police to account because, at the very least, it gives us some sense of what's going on behind closed doors. Better to have some information than none at all, which makes the next part of the story even more concerning. Last week, a lawsuit was filed against the same Justice Department that I was just talking about. The legal action from the NAACP came after the DOJ did something that is, in a sense, indicative of what the show is all about. The court filings accused the department of convening a special panel on the future of American policing in secret. And even more concerning is that every single person on the panel is a member of law enforcement. For more on this development, I'm joined by my reporting partner, Stephen Janis. Stephen, what is this panel and why is this happening?
Well, this panel is part of a federal advisory sort of process that was instituted years ago that sort of impanels people to look at complex social problems and solve them. The problem with what is happening is that it actually breaks the law. The law requires that you have people from both sides and both perspectives. It also requires that you meet in public. So that's a problem. They've constituted a so-called law enforcement panel that actually breaks the law and is in violation of the process itself.
Stephen, this is fascinating. What brought all of this to fruition?
Well, it's really interesting. This speaks exactly to what I think what Neill said is absolutely critical. If you can't hold police accountable, nothing's going to change. And so there have been a series of advisory panels. Under the Obama administration, it was called the 21st Century Policing. These panels are created to come up with solutions to complex problems, as I said. And so in the Obama era, they had, people from the defense bar, they had community activists, but this one, constituted by Attorney General Barr, has nothing but law enforcement. And on top of it, even though the law demands that they hold their hearings in public, because they're called hearings, they've been holding them in secret that no one can watch. And on top of that, they created about 15 working panels that have about 115 members, and only 5 of them are non-law enforcement. So this is kind of the political economy that Neill was talking about, where law enforcement is so insular. Here's a perfect opportunity for the public to have input, for community members, for activists to say, hey, this is what's wrong with policing. Well, guess what? The citizens and the activists have been completely shut out of the process, and not only can they not participate, but they can't even watch it.
Sorry, gang. I wanted you guys to sort of hop in here, but as it relates to it's so interesting because I actually think I know somebody who's working on that. When you said that, I said, that sounds familiar. I think a friend of mine is actually dealing with that, and I told them to do a very bad job for Bill Barr, by the way. But so I'm talking about as we look ahead, something that Eddie said really stuck with me as he makes the comparisons to Nazi Germany. I mean, these police are continuing to grow and progress in their powers, and conversely in their insulation. In such a way, it seems as though that train has already left the station some time ago. And really, what is to stop them from behaving like the Gestapo at this point?
Well, I mean, we did a show, and I would be interesting to hear what Neill has to say with this. We did a show where we calculated the pension assets that had been put aside for the police in the top 10 departments. It was $84 billion. And some people we spoke to recommended that the police pensions be tapped to pay for brutality lawsuits and be paid to tap for police misbehavior. Now, Neill, you might be against this, but at least some sort of fiscal accountability is probably the place to start, right? I mean, or is that wrong?
So I agree with you. Again, when you hit someone in the purse, they get it, they understand it. They learn from the mistakes of others, and they don't want to repeat those mistakes themselves. In addition to that, Stephen, where you're looking at the pensions and tapping into the pensions to pay for these lawsuits, there's been another thing that's been proposed, and again tied to money. and police officers, and also, which is very important, the certification of police officers and losing those certifications. And that is private insurance by police officers.
Yeah.
Now, and just so people understand what this is. So, for instance, you graduate from the police academy. During that first year, the police department's going to pay your premium for your insurance policy. However, if you do things, if your behavior causes the department to be sued, and that insurance that you're carrying goes up, you have to pay the difference in the increase of your premium of your insurance policy. And when the carrier, when that insurance company decides to drop you because now you've had 2, maybe 3 lawsuits, you're dropped. You can't get certified without being able to get insurance, just like a car. If you can't get insurance for your car, you can't drive. It should be the same thing. We, the police departments, the community, will pay your basic premium. But when that cost goes up because of your behavior, because of your conduct, and you have to pay that premium, then you get it. Then you understand it. And if you are dropped by the insurance carrier, you can no longer be certified. And we, the people, don't have to worry about you anymore abusing your power. I think that's something we really need to look at. And I think it would actually be more beneficial than pensions. I sure don't want my pension. I'm going to be straightforward with you.
No, that's actually a great idea. That I had heard that, but I never heard it explained. That is actually something that might work. Because unless these guys feel it in the pocketbook, cities can indemnify police officers for almost all claims. As you might know, and we haven't talked about, the city was trying to say that the Gun Trace Task Force, which were 8 officers who robbed residents, stole overtime, the notorious Gun Trace Task Force, that the city wasn't responsible. And they didn't have to pay any of these settlements based on their lawsuits, which of course meant that the people who were suing them for robbing them and doing all the other bad stuff weren't going to get paid. And fortunately, the city lost that argument. But on the other hand, it shows that there's no accountability to police, because you can behave like a criminal, go out and rob people. You can deal drugs, which is what they were doing, and you have no liability. You have absolutely no exposure. And I think Neill's idea is actually pretty good.
So the city is responsible for that task force because they failed to properly manage.
That's what the court said.
They let them go out there and do whatever they wanted to do. So they didn't have proper oversight of that group of thugs. And here we are. The city's responsible. The people now have to pay for that crap. You see? Now, if we had private insurance, if these police officers had their own insurance policies, you know what? The people would be off the financial hook for that. And you know what? We can guarantee you that these cops will never carry a badge again.
Oh, man. The cops, they would even maybe police themselves, because if they knew that, my partners, if he screws up, my insurance might go up, even if it was a collective thing, it would be good. It'd be good to have a little collective responsibility instead of, oh, don't worry, the taxpayers will cover it. We don't have to worry about it.
Let the unions pay the premiums.
Right. I once asked the mayor and the police commissioner, I said, is a police union running the city? Because the police union wouldn't meet with her for like a month after she was elected. And she hesitated, because the police union was like, I don't have to meet with the mayor of Baltimore City. Screw her. Right. And they didn't meet with her for a month or two. They had that much power. It's insane in Baltimore. They basically run Baltimore City. Police unions are definitely a big issue.
We can fix that. All we have to do is the same thing we did in Camden, New Jersey, right?
Right.
I know. Fix that if we want to.
Yeah, they reduced their policing costs. Well, just so everyone knows, Camden, New Jersey got rid of their police department, they contracted out, and they saved about $50,000 per officer, because they couldn't control the police department. The union had all the power, and they said, okay, let's just get rid of it. And I think there are a lot of people in Baltimore City who wouldn't be unhappy about that.
Yeah.
Eddie, I'm going to let you have the last word before we sign off.
Well, we're going in a bad direction, down a bad road, and unfortunately, there's more of this stuff to come, because as things get tight and people get depressed, there's going to be incident after incident, and at some point, it's going to hit a point where some kind of systematic change has to take place. And it's unfortunate, but it's in our future. We're not going to get out of this. We're not going to convince the people that's in power to change their behavior because they don't have any moral compass. And until we make it cost, until it costs them money, like Neill said, and I'm not just talking about the police now, I'm talking about the people that's actually benefiting from this arrangement.
Right.
If this arrangement's not going to change, then the problem we have is we don't have a democracy here. We don't elect the people that we want in office. We get the people that the ruling class decides that we can vote on. And that's not going to change until we do something different.
Well said. Well, again, we appreciate everybody watching. I'd like to thank our fantastic panel for joining us today on Stir Crazy. Eddie Conway, Neill Franklin, Stephen Janis. Don't forget tonight, people, 9:00 p.m., brand new episode, Police Accountability Report. You definitely want to watch it live. I know Taya gets engaged in the chat and in the comments and whatnot. So you want to be make sure you come back, set an alarm for that. 9:00 tonight, Police Accountability Report right here on The Real News. I'm your host, Kim Brown. We'll see y'all tomorrow. Another episode of Stir Crazy. Y'all have a good one, y'all. Peace.
You too. Thanks, Kim.
Thank you, guys.